Greetings, Starfighter. You are about to listen to the totally super awesome 80s Reboot Overdrive podcast. Always remember, no matter where you go, there you are. Ready Player One.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special 80s Reboot Overdrive podcast. Tonight, we are doing a Stephen King book club. But fear not, we're sticking with the 80s theme. We're going to talk mostly about his output in the 80s. And joining me is two great guys. I love podcasting, both of them. First off, my first podcast partner, Lou. So Lou, say hi and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Hi, this is Lou Sitzma. I'm from Alberta, Canada. And if you're into Stephen King at all, you may have heard me over at the Stephen King podcast over at Lilja's Library, which is a website run by now a friend of mine, Hans Lilja, out of Sweden. He's been running that for over 20 years. And we're up to podcast episode number 49 there. And, you know, when we started it, we were worried that we might not get more than like 10 or a dozen episodes. But given Mr. King's prolific output in the last couple of decades, and actually over his whole career, so far that hasn't been a problem.
Yeah, and I will tell you, one of my favorites is when you guys kind of went through all the different versions of The Shining.
Oh, yes.
And that was just so interesting and made me like, oh, I need to re-see these and I need to rewatch. And you guys were getting ready for the kind of sequel, right? So
Yep.
To pull the curtains back a little bit, well, go ahead. Scott, introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm Scott. I'm down here I live in Florida, and I've been part of the 80s Reboot podcast a few times now. Talked with Jesse a couple times on favorite movies and a couple different things. I'm very excited about this topic, though. I'm a big Stephen King fan. I've read quite a few of his books. I can't say I've read everything, but I think the 80s, a lot of the books that I read in the 80s probably were, I would say 80% of them were just Stephen King. A lot of the other books that I read were, bits and pieces of other authors, but Stephen King definitely was the main focus of my reading back during that time.
Yeah, and just to share up the geography, I'm in Dallas, Texas. So we are
cool.
Spanning the globe.
This is a right-angle triangle.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and to give you a little pull back the curtain, Dave, our glorious leader, was reached out to us and said, hey, do you guys want to do a few different kind of podcasts? And so because Lou is such a wonderful expert on Stephen King, I said, I think this will be an interesting discussion. And Scott immediately raised his hand and said, I want to be part of this discussion. So I'll start us off. I am not a fan of horror. I've never been someone who likes getting scared. I don't like scary movies. Even the old Universal black and white, I was too much of a, meow to even watch them. And a good friend of mine, David Fair, loves Stephen King. And he said, he handed me The Dead Zone. And he says, you've got to read this book. I don't like horror. Jesse, if we're friends, you've got to read this book. And I still think it may be my favorite book. I certainly love The Green Mile and a couple others, but The Dead Zone was just like nothing I'd ever read before. And it was so good, and it was such a great story, and it ended so sad that I said, okay, maybe I need to read a few other things. So, and I think because of the amount of books he puts out, sometimes I get behind,
Understandable.
but then I catch up. So, that's where I'm coming from, where I think I'd call myself a casual Stephen King fan, though a couple of them I'm just amazed with. So, Lou,
Cool.
how did you get to enjoy The Master?
Well, I think some people can remember their childhood and things very clearly. Mine's always kind of fuzzy, but I'm pretty sure the first Stephen King book I ever saw was the Shining, the one that had the silver color cover with the silhouette of the boy on it.
Right.
And I read that book, and that book just blew me away. And then I went back and read Salem's Lot. What other ones was there back then? Carrie. So he had Salem's Lot and Carrie, and then The Shining, and then I was hooked by then. And then once The Stand came out, and then after that, The Dead Zone, which I like quite a lot too, and I'll get into a little bit later on why. But from there, and this is hard. I'm sure this is a theme that you've probably covered in your other episodes. It's really hard for people to remember a time before the internet, because these things that we're talking about, we didn't have any foreknowledge of them. It was often a stroke of luck that we would run into one of these things, or word of mouth from a friend. But you had to really dig to find this stuff back then, and it was quite the search sometimes to find new material. And it's such a different age that we live in now. Or if you want to look up somebody, you just Google it, and boom, you've got the whole resume of the person.
Yeah, I mean, now then, if you say, "Oh, I found a new series," I wonder what order I should read them in. Hello, Mr. Google, or a lot of times the author has a website. But like when I would read Lawrence Block, or Spencer for Hire, Robert Parker, I just picked up the book, whatever I could find, and read them. Did not even think about trying to read them in order. So yeah, that's a great point. Scott, how about you?
I can't remember exactly which one it was I read first. I know it was probably in my high school years, and that was between 82 and 86. And it was either Cujo or Christine. So let me look at the thing. I think it was Cujo.
Okay.
And it was pretty amazing. It wasn't as like supernatural as a lot of his other stuff becomes. He's got a lot of stuff that is very supernatural, and Cujo was just so real.
Yeah.
It was just a dog with rabies that went nuts, and this unfortunate woman and her son get stuck in a car, which it's a story that could never be told today, because it would have to be completely redone. But it was the way he just built a lot of the suspense. It took my reading levels to different areas, because I was really, I really didn't understand horror or anything. I think he was kind of my beginning into really reading stuff that's outside the norm of fiction. Yeah. Like, I remember, back in like 7th or 8th grade, I read like The Outsiders, the S.E. Hinton. It was real, and it was relatable, and you could be one of those kids in those books. But Stephen King's imagination was just phenomenal, and it makes your own imagination go into different areas, and you can really, he does such a great job of just describing everything. So, Cujo and maybe even Firestarter was one that might have, that now that goes into a little bit more of a superhero, supernatural type thing, but still, he captured me. His writing style definitely captured me, and I just thought it was just so imaginative. And looking back now, I see that he must have been a huge fan of Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone, because there's a lot of correlation between those, some of his books and some of those stories that were from the Twilight Zone. So it's fun. It's fun to see the progression of your somebody else's imagination spawning off somebody else's imagination, and then giving you your own way of seeing things in that sense too. It's just a lot of fun.
It is, and I think you bring up a good point about his writing style. he is a very plain writer. He writes it in a way that is immediately accessible. The characters very quickly, and it is not, at least from my perspective, not a lot of hard work to read his novels. I never got into Tom Clancy because it just felt too much work. It was too hard of a novel to read.
It's cumbersome.
Yeah, and Stephen is just comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
he's a storyteller.
He is a storyteller. Well said, Lou.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there are stories that are uplifting, and then there are stories that, just disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
But absolutely.
Yeah.
And so,
I think for me that the best way I can always, when people ask me why do I like Stephen King so much, is and you've already hit on it when you said like his writing is simple, but you mean in the way that it's easy to read, not that he's a simple writer, because he does some very clever things with words, but he's the only writer where the words on the page disappear for me, and it's much more like I feel like I'm sitting around a campfire listening to a master storyteller tell an oral story as opposed to reading a book.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's a comfortable style. It is he can tell some complex stories, but he doesn't lose you, and it feels really good.
Yeah.
So very nice. So
would you like me to set up the 80s a little bit for you?
Yes, please do, Lou.
Okay, so Stephen King got his first break back in '74 with Carrie, but and by the time he got to the 80s, he was starting to become a household name. He just had The Shining and The Stand were out, and so the 80s are kind of his rock and roll era, and this is the good and bad of it. Yeah, he had a lot of energy, but he also had a lot of problems with excess, and this was this decade of where he was drinking heavily and also using cocaine. It's not an era of his life that he's, that he likes to talk about or is proud of now. But during that time period, and this is something that he's echoed throughout his career, his wife really saved his career. I mean, she's the one that dug Carrie out of the trash. She's the one that dumped all his drug paraphernalia junk and put it on fire and said, if this doesn't stop, we're over. And he... and this was in the late 80s, so he had to clean up. And it's interesting that you mentioned Scott Cujo, because that's one of the books that he says he has very little recollection of writing,
Wow.
which just kind of blows my mind, because most people that with full possession of their faculties, if they could come up with a book that good, they'd be happy. And he says he barely remembers writing that book. But
wow, that's amazing.
I think what King established, what King established in this decade is that, like as you've alluded to, Scotty, is he is a storyteller, and his body of work during this decade really shown that. And the other two things that Cujo shows to me is King dips into the common pool of fear that everybody shares. Like we all have a fear of rabies and rabid dogs. And the proof is in the pudding is it's become part of the pop culture. If somebody talks about calls a dog Cujo, immediately what they're referring to.
Absolutely.
Right?
So he did
amazing.
Yeah, so he did for dogs what Spielberg did for sharks with Jaws.
Mm-hmm.
And he's done that, and he's done that time and time again with all his other books. And so this was probably the most turbulent period in King's career. Because he had because he come from very poor background. So during the 80s, the money was just basically coming, and he was full of energy, and the ideas that he had been, percolating were just flowing out. So he ended up in the 80s writing a total of 20 books, which just kind of blows my mind.
Wow!
but we're now, it's in 2015. He's going to be releasing his 68th book this year. So
wow.
He's been pretty constant. And this is a man that had a serious, near-life death experience at the near the turn of the century. So that was the 80s is the rock and roll era. It's King's rawest period, I think, and it's his most up and down as well. I think this, the quality from the the high stuff to the low stuff is more variable in this time period. He's more consistent in his other decades, but so this is where he started to become a household name, and he struggled with the success, and thankfully his wife turned him around near the end of the decade.
And I think it's amazing that he has stayed married to her.
Yes.
You hear so many people reach fame, fortune, lose their mind, and their marriages don't survive.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like they, are a solid partnership. And and I think I'm sure you guys have talked about it on your podcast, but it's amazing how talented his family is.
Yep.
Lock and Key is as good a comic series, and it's creepy and it's scary, but it's so well done. Yep. So yeah, good. Well, okay. Well, with that said, the first book was Firestarter, September 29th.
Right.
So Lou, you want to tell us a little about that, and then we'll have Scott and me talk about what our memories of it.
Okay, again, this is one of the books where the cover really caught my eye, and the version that I remember is the white cover, which has sort of like the eyes and the nose and the mouth of the girl, but the flames are coming from her lips up through the middle of her face. Mm-hmm. This is not one of his strongest books for me. I do enjoy it. I did enjoy it. The relationship between her and her father, and the Raintree character was interesting, and of course the shop, which King sort of played around with, and that actually showed up in a TV series that he did later on, Golden Years. But it was an interesting book to kick off the decade of the 1980s with, and it's just a continuation. It came right after The Dead Zone, and it just shows King's ability to create stories with regular characters.
Now, go ahead, Scott, and then I'll talk.
I remember reading it. I remember it. It seems like every book that I read of his back in that time, I was really enthralled in. And I mean, I can't remember a lot of things specifically from the book, but
yeah.
I do specifically remember enjoying it thoroughly. And a little side note, just Lou mentioned something about how the internet has made things so much easier to just find out all these things and be up to date on everything that's going on. I am racking my brain to try to remember how in the world I knew King was coming out with a new book. I don't remember it being on like a TV commercial. I don't remember a radio commercial. I don't remember any of that. I just remember always being able to pick up a new book. And so I know that's off topic of Firestarter, but it's I'm looking at this list. I'm going, I read, I think almost every single one of these. I'm like, I don't remember how I found out about them.
I think it was mostly either through libraries or the book section of the newspapers.
I think I was a member of a book club at the time.
Yeah, book club of the month. Also carried his books.
So I think I would get those. I do remember picking things up from the library. So this will be something I say often. I have not gone back and reread this book. There's some I have and some I haven't. But so hopefully, Lou, you will correct me if I'm wrong. But this is the one where the guy is obsessed with the garbage disposal, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that is 25 years ago, and I've read the book once, but I remember that image, and every time I go to the kitchen and turn on the garbage disposal, that image comes to my mind.
Okay, you have to refresh my memory. I'm not recalling this.
Okay, well, that's because the father had the ability to plant thoughts in people's mind.
Oh, right.
But the problem was when he did that, he would cause sort of like a chain effect, and if somebody had like a phobia or a fixation on something, they would that would come to the surface. And for this one character, something in the garbage disposal, caught his mind. One of the main characters from the shop had a fear of snakes, and that became his phobia. So
okay.
Yeah. So yeah, King was just having fun with phobias,
Yeah, but I think that's interesting that I'm remembering that, and I know I was impressed that the father and daughter relationship and how much he was wanting to support her, and I remember someone discussing this with me, saying she worked at a dispatching oil company that I worked at a trucking company, and we talked, and she thought that Stephen King's weakness was how he put current cultural references in there.
Oh yeah.
And that will date the book. And she said, like, will anyone know Rolling Stone in 25 years?
You roll the dice on that stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
But I thought, and you can go both ways, right? There is a beauty to having something that is timeless, but there is also something to say, I'm shooting for this audience at this mindset of this time, and if it becomes dated, who cares? I trust in the story itself will carry on.
Yeah, I think that's because King's stories work on two levels, and one, the character level, is the themes that they go through in the books are the same ones that you go through regardless of the time period. So the time period stuff just gives you the flavor, and King just has a little bit of fun poking fun at society. But really, you could take any one of these stories for the most part and transplant them to the present day, and with a little bit of retooling the themes of the characters, and that would still work.
Yeah. For those of you who may be talking to your podcast player saying, hey, you guys aren't mentioning the movie made out of the book, one of Drew Barrymore's, we've decided that we're going to just talk books this episode, and then we're going to get us back together in a week or so and talk about the King movies of the 80s.
All right.
So,
But I have to mention, I do like the ambiance. I don't know who it is, but the dog in the background, I'm assuming that's Cujo.
Yes, that is Chris Jackson's puppy that I am babysitting. Yes, so it is kind of fitting.
I thought it was my dogs outside, because my wife is going to be letting the dogs out here in a little bit, probably before she heads off to bed. And I'm like, what are they barking at out there? Is there a cat or a bunny or what?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, one book down, 19 to go.
Yes, here we go. Yes, get something to drink, folks, because this will do this. So, Dance McCabe, all I can remember about it is this was a nonfiction book, right?
This is correct.
And I did not enjoy that as much. It felt a little too much like a textbook for me.
Okay.
That's it. I have not gone back and tried to reread it, so... Do you want to give us a little background on that one, Lou? And
sure. This is King's sort of autobiography of the things that he feels led him to become the person that he became. And so it covers a lot of the movies, TV shows, and books that he read. And at the end of this book, I mean, this is from 1981, so the list is obviously very dated, but he lists, the top 100 books that he thinks everybody should read. And I can understand for the casual fan, this is not a book that will probably interest you too much, especially if you don't want to know the magic behind the curtain of where King came from. But as a big King fan, and as a constant reader, I love this book. I think it's a great history of the horror genre in general. He touches on a lot of very seminal works, from H.P. Lovecraft to Rod Serling to... I'm blanking on the writer's mind now. The guy that wrote Nightmare at 20,000 Feet and the vampire movie that Will Smith starred in. And Charlton Heston did a version of it too. Why am I drawing a blank on his mind? But
I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
great writer. So that kind of stuff. He talked about The Outer Limits, The Twilight Zone. He talked about the Hammer pictures, especially like The Pit and the Pendulum. A lot of the Vincent Price movies.
Oh yeah.
So if you're into horror. And you want to know a good reference book that's, probably a lot more interesting to read than a straight text kind of book. This is an excellent book by King. He's done 2 other nonfiction books. My favorite is On Writing, which he did in the 90s. But Dance Macabre is a great history of the horror genre if you are looking for a book about that.
Yeah, like I said, I have not read this in a while, but hearing you describe it makes me want to go put it on my wish list on my Kindle, because that it sounds like, from as an older Jesse might understand a little more the history and want to see that. So yeah, thanks. How
Yeah,
about you, Scott?
I gotta agree with you on this, because I remember picking it up back then, and
Hmm.
I might have read 20 pages, and just was like, okay, this is just not. This is not interesting to me at all
Yeah,
right now. But now, knowing what it was, I've in my older years, I'm becoming much more of a fan of history,
yeah,
Yep.
and learning of how things got to where they were, where they are.
hmm
Especially like World War II. That's all fascinating to me, and what was really about what World War II was really about, and World War One even. We could go. That's like a
yeah.
whole different several podcasts of talking on that kind of topic. But anyway, now that you say and you describe, now that Lou describes it this way, it intrigues me and makes me really consider want to go back and getting it, just because I like to know the history behind where he was coming from.
Yeah.
It's a little odd. It's a little odd to me that it's as early in his repertoire as it is. Like
And
81 is so early for him.
and you wonder if this is one of those things, as you talked about, Lou. He's a rock star, and his publishing house is like, whatever you want,
Yep.
because if we put your name on the title, we're gonna sell some books.
Yes. I'm not sure if this was published through his main publisher. This might
Okay.
have been like done through another label. I don't have that on my
Okay.
fingertips, unfortunately. But it's interesting that you've made that remark, because our next book will even show even more how much of a rock star he was.
I wondered if you could give me a little bit. I remember, I guess it was in the late 80s, when someone published, the Bachman books,
Mm-hmm.
and
Hmm.
there were 4 novels all at one time, and that's when I read them.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
Uh,
like 85 or
yeah.
something like that.
I know
85, 86.
Chris was born in 89, and I know it was before he was born. So I had no clue about this, and so I certainly didn't read it when it came out. So tell us a little bit about this. I remember vaguely the story, but Lou, I'm sure you can fill us in. What was going on with this Richard Bachman deal?
Okay, well, there's a couple of things going on here. Partly, King was, as I said, he was on fire in this decade from a production standpoint. Whether that was in part due to his excessive lifestyle, it could have been, but his publisher was worried that he was putting out too much stuff. You have to remember, things moved much slower back in those days. Movies would stay in theaters for months, as opposed to having to win their box office weekend, which is kind of like, one weekend to make over 50% of your box
Right.
office and everything. Now, back then movies stayed in the theaters for a couple of months. So they needed more lead time for King, but he had these other books that were a little harsher, a little more raw than what he was writing, and he wanted to try an experiment. He wanted to see, because he was releasing, as you said, material under the Stephen King name, and basically it was, it would sell like crazy. So he wanted to see if he could recreate that whole experience of taking an unknown writer and becoming big. These are one of the books that he released. The first one was Rage back in the late 70s, and that's a very, very interesting book, and it's the only book that King has ever pulled from circulation. And just a little background on that. Of course, it's a story about a student that goes into school and starts shooting his teachers and fellow students. So King wrote this way back in the 70s, and then later on, when it was found out that some kids that were doing things like this in real life had his book in his locker, he decided to pull it, because not that he believes that book and specifically was turning kids into killers, but he said it's an accelerant, and he didn't want to have it on the shelves because of that. So he made that decision. And Roadwork is another man against the government kind of book about a man who's having trouble in his marriage and finding out that the government wants to build a highway through his property, and basically, he has to relocate. So that's an interesting story. But the whole Bachman thing is, and again, it shows King's inventiveness, because this will fuel the book that closes out this decade, is called The Dark Half. So Richard Bachman lived for quite a while before he was found out, again in the pre-internet days. So that's where Bachman came from.
Okay. Do you remember anything about the book, Scott?
Actually, when this collection came out as the Bachman books, I remember getting one single book which had all 4 stories in it.
Yep.
I was so excited when I first got it. I'm like, I cannot wait to read this. And it was really weird for me, because I don't remember like any other book line except into the 90s when I started reading some Star Wars, some of the Star Wars series. But I remember always being excited about this. And this book, when I read The Running Man, I actually read it twice, like back to back, because it was so cool. I just loved that. And Jesse, I don't remember if you were in on this podcast, but we talked about this movie, and I know we're talking about the movies later, but 2 totally different stories. So anyway, So The Running Man grabbed my attention so well, and I just loved the premise of it. I loved his character building of who he was, who the main character was. I can't remember his name, of course, right now. But who his character was. And they built it up so well. You knew the guy, and that's one of the things that he really does well, is he gets you to know the people in his books. And it's fascinating to get to know them. Yeah, it's like you're like Lou said, you're sitting there being told a story about a friend of Stephen King's. Yeah. It's like he's just relaying a story that happened to him. It's so natural.
You really are just sitting there like at a someone's living room with a soft drink or an adult beverage. And you're just sharing stories, and you're captivated by this tale. Yeah. This is a sad book again. I know there is, and the more we talk about this, I think, and Lou will not be surprised to hear me say this. After a while, I get tired of reading depressing stories, and I think that may be one of the reasons why I drifted away from reading the moment they're published, because I just didn't want to be depressed.
I understand where you're coming from on that, where a lot of his stories end up where you're not exactly thrilled about the ending. But I gotta say, it's a lot closer to reality than what we like to admit.
I totally agree, and I think maybe that's why.
I see. You're trying to escape. You're trying to get out of that mindset. And you want to get away. You want to get away from the dreary of sometimes you don't win. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you don't win, and bad things happen to people, whether they're good or bad or ugly, whatever.
Absolutely.
So it's I mean, so that was I think that's one of the things that I do like about his writing, is that he keeps. Even though he has some of the supernatural stuff, he still keeps it real by ending on a note that happens sometimes.
Mm. Yeah. There's usually a price to pay for. And King is very much a journey writer, not a destination writer. So if you need him to stick the landing, he's probably not the best writer for that. He's done that a couple of times, but because he's a discovery writer, he's much more interested in the journey than the final resting point. And the character's name in Road, The Running Man, was Ben Richards, which is kind of interesting. And again, with King's crazy imagination, that character ends up flying a jet into a building. It's like unbelievable.
Yeah, which
he just seems to tap into this mind pool of
That was I would say that book, that novella in that 4 series book was definitely my highlight. It's obvious.
Yeah.
Yes.
The other 3 books I definitely enjoyed. I thought they were interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that Rage had to be pulled off the shelves. I mean, especially after Columbine.
Yeah. It didn't
I don't
have to
remember.
be. King made the call.
Yeah, that's.
And
I mean, it had to be done by him. I mean,
Yeah.
it really that's kudos to him for recognizing it and seeing that it really is. It was darker than what most people want to see out there. And there's a lot of other dark books out there, but I think that hits too close to home for. Because of so many things that have happened in our.
Yeah, it just shows King's again his unerring ability to pick at the common fears that we have.
Yeah,
it's just unbelievable.
Just to go back, your perspective changes. I remember reading The Stand the first time it came out, and before it was the expanded version, and absolutely loving the book. Mm-hmm. And then when the revamped, director's cut, as we talked about, come down, Chris had been born, and early in the book they're talking about children dying, and it was tougher for me as a new dad.
Yep.
I
had that experience more with The Shining.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So talking about a short, a cultural touch point, the book Cujo. We've already talked a little bit about it. Mm-hmm. Once again, a very depressing ending. Mm-hmm. But I remember being. I mean, this was a page turner.
Oh yeah.
Because you're trying to figure, and I remember being actively engaged and reading it, mm-hmm. trying to think what they could do.
Yeah.
How could they have done this? And what can you do? And what can you do? So,
mm-hmm. The tension of the mother and the son trapped in that car was just unbearable. Like you just kept reading it because you thought, how are they going to get out of this? You just couldn't put it down. And it's a real page turner.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the things I like about that, it's that it's so small. Like it's such a. There's really, it's not a huge setting, I mean, it's just, mm-hmm. they're just trapped in this car. I mean, and how do you write several hundred pages about being, most of it was in the car. I mean, mm-hmm. granted, there's outside stuff, but being trapped in this thing, and how do you just come up with so many words to fill that much tiny space and have it just seem so intense and so huge at the same time? Yep. It's just it was just so well written in that it's hard to explain. Mm-hmm. It's just such a small scenario. Let's call it that, a small scenario that mm-hmm. he was able to just completely wrap your world up in that little tiny bubble. And it was, wow. And like you said, it was a total page turner. I don't think it took me more than, I don't know, maybe a week to read that. And I'm not a very fast reader, so a week is good for 300 pages for me.
Yeah. And you make a great point, Scott, about it being a small story. And Jesse had mentioned earlier that his first book was The Dead Zone. And that's the reason that I liked The Dead Zone, because The Shining and even for some reason, or The Shining, but I'm sorry, The Stand and Salem's Lot was like a large kind of, a fairly large cast of characters. Mm-hmm. But the Dead Zone showed to me, plus, the whole idea of flipping and making a Lee Harvey Oswald kind of character, a sympathetic one, just blew me away. But he was really dialing it down to just a handful of characters, and he showed that he could handle, large and small casts of characters, and Firestarter and Cujo just continued that. But The Dead Zone, to me, just was the moment I said, this guy's going to stick around. I didn't know he was going to stick around as long as he has, but I thought this guy's got a lot of range, and these books show that.
They really do, because the diversity, and we talked about this, and I think we'll keep saying it. He character, not plot. Yep. He doesn't mm-hmm. come up with, okay, here's a night's story. he may come up with, okay, what if a mom and a son were stuck in a car?
Mhm.
Or what if a lady, what if a young girl had the ability to start fires? What would happen? But it is the things that happen to the characters, not necessarily, a clever plot.
Yeah, I mean, like Cujo starts out with a little boy who's afraid of the monster in the closet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his dad writes him the monster words to keep him safe, and then he gets trapped in the car, and the monster has come out of the closet. So I mean, it's just
it really is.
It's just brilliant.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, he's really touching on that fear, like you
Yes.
mentioned before. That fear is one of the first fears that you ever have as a child, too.
Yep.
So that one's going way back. Other than like being away from your parents, probably like separated from your family or whatever, you might be really fearful of that. But the monster under the bed or the monster under the closet, that goes way back to childhood. And when he starts bringing that back up around, it really triggers things in your head.
Exactly.
It draws you in. It makes it relatable. So it's
one of the interviews I read with him years ago, and I love the idea that he talked about his kids would go to sleep without a cover. Like on they'll just, when it was warm outside, they would just go lay on the bed and not cover up. And he was like, no, you have to have a cover, and you have to put it underneath your feet so that when the monster comes from under the bed, he would grab the sheet and the cover, not your correct ankle.
Yep.
And I went, yes, exactly. And I don't think he was joking. I mean, he was joking, but I mean, in his mind, he thought that way. You can't just, no, you've got to have that protection. Awesome. So you already talked a little about The Running Man.
I think we've covered that one pretty good.
Yeah, and I agree. It was just a great story. Now,
and the movie was terrible. I don't know what you guys said.
I can't wait. I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where Orson Scott Card once talked about someone had made a version of a young adult novel that he really loved, and he says, and not that it's necessarily a bad movie, but they'll never make the true movie of this book, and he thinks that's the true tragedy, and so absolutely. Now I have to. I'm glad we're feeling comfortable and we can, moment of trust. I've never read any of the Dark Tower books. I know.
Now,
unfortunately, your position is not that uncommon. That seems to split the King fandom down the middle.
Yeah, I remember reading The Gunslinger and the second one, The Drawing of the Three, and I think I finished The Wastelands. I'm pretty sure I did. I haven't picked any of them up since then, but I actually do have The Gunslinger in my nightstand right now, and I did pick it up recently and start to try to reread it. But I have so many things that I'm reading, researching mostly through the computer, and I like the good old, I like a book. I can't do Kindle. I can't do that. I listen to books more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
I can't find The Gunslinger on any recorded version anywhere. So
really? There's several. Yeah. There's several
really?
out there. Yeah, I even got I got an old cassette version where King actually reads the first book.
No way, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, it's pretty
that's
awesome.
neat.
Yeah.
I've looked everywhere. Like I don't like paying the $25-$30. I typically check everything out of the library and listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, your library should have it. I'm surprised they don't.
Where I was living before, they did not have a copy of it, and in all of their system, they had 8 or 9 different libraries, all part of one system.
Wow!
And none of them had that one. It all started with the Dark Tower 2. So I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna have to read. I'm gonna have to read The Gunslinger again, and then I'll start listening to the rest of them because I know all of those are out and available on CD. Yep. Everything after that, the Wolves of Kala. What is that? Wolves of Kala?
Kala. Yeah.
Kala.
So Lou, tell me, as someone who hasn't read them, why should I? And what is he shooting for in this?
Well, we could spend a whole podcast on the Dark Tower because I love this series. And to put it into like a elevator pitch, this is Stephen King's version of Lord of the Rings meets Clint Eastwood's Men with No Name. You know, it's just a fantastic series. And what this series does is, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this at all, but basically a large part of King's books all tie together, and the Dark Tower is the axis around which they all rotate. So you will have sections of the book that reference other novels, but it might not be the same version of that world. There's an instance where they're crossing a certain area, and it looks like a scene out of the stand because there's all these abandoned cars and Captain Trips and that. But they see a newspaper and it's spelt slightly different, so that the hint is that it's not the reality that we know the stand that took place in. But so this is this is Lord of the Rings, and I forgot one other some kind of
post-apocalyptic thing too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
and it's kind of a Western.
It's trying to prevent the breakdown of the universe. So Roland is because I forgot one comparison. It's Lord of the Rings meets the spaghetti westerns meets King Arthur. So Roland is one of the brand of what are called gunslingers, and they're basically like Lone Rangers. His gun is made from the metal of Excalibur. And he has a whole creed about his gun, and that's why he's called the Gunslinger. And they're very revered by the people that know them. And there's other worlds and realities. So, there's the Dark Tower is kind of like the key to the universe, and it's supported by these beams. And on these beams, you'll find characters like Shardik, if you've ever read the Richard Adams novels. There's the turtle. So there's all these animals, and these beams basically support all the reality. And if these beams go, and that's what's happening, these beams are being destroyed by the Dark Man from The Stand. And so that's another tie-in. So this series ties all of those books together. Now, The Gunslinger was originally written as a standalone book, and he later on revised it to make it fit in better with the rest of the series. And it's a very high concept kind of novel, so it's a little colder than his other works.
Okay,
but it's got that great opening line. The Dark Men fled across the desert, and the Gunslinger followed. And Stephen King says that's one of the best openings that he's ever written to any book. So. This is just a fantastic series, and if you guys have been following the news lately, this is one of those series that they say next to Lord of the Rings is unfilmable, and there's been several false starts. But I tell you, man, if they ever get this one going, I would just love it. And there are scenes in here that will break your heart, Jesse.
Okay,
there are scenes in here that will break your heart. I'm telling you, it's just a fantastic series. And it was a 22-year journey from the first book to the last one before he finished the series. So,
and the series is finished.
The series is finished. Yes,
okay.
He has written a follow-up book that sort of fits in between two of the books in the series. But yeah, the main course of the story is done. But it's a series that for half the King readership, they just could never get into it because it's not set like in King's books usually take place in a recognizable setting, as present time or whatever. This one really jumps all over the place in time and realities. So it's a mix of horror, fantasy, science fiction, western. So it's the cross genre novel of series of all time, and it's a tough sell. But especially if you can get into the second book, The Drawing of the Three, which is my favorite book, just from that point on, man, oh man, I just couldn't get enough of that series.
Can you forget? Do you need to read the first one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a setup.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And he rewrote it later on, so if you get the revised version, it's not as tough to read as the first version.
All right.
I do remember the first version being almost a short story. Like it was
Yeah.
not very.
Yeah.
It wasn't very long, and I think the newer one that I believe I probably have the newer version of it. It's a little bit thicker, a little bit more meat in it, so I'm guessing it's probably got a little extra to it. So
let me see. The first book is 216 pages, and the revised version is 220.
that's it. He only added 8 pages.
231 pages. So
231.
And the difference could just be due to the type.
Okay.
I actually think the revised version's a bit shorter.
Okay.
But,
Oh, really?
Okay.
yeah.
Huh. Okay.
I will. Okay, so that's 2 books I've added to my
Actually,
Amazon wish
you've
list.
added 7.
Yeah, well, true. Yeah. Good. So if on the short list of favorite books from Stephen King is his next release, which is actually a collection, Different Seasons.
Yep.
I think this is a lot of people know because of the movies that have been released based on these novellas. But I remember reading these and loved all 4 of them. Just as much, they all were different.
Yep.
A brilliant introduction to the collection. And I know that Lou and I both love Shawshank Redemption.
All-time favorite movie?
Yes. And
it's up there.
And I will tell you, I love the idea of the breathing method and that club. I don't know if he's gone back to that ever.
No, he hasn't.
But I would love a series of stories set in that club.
Yeah.
I read this very young, but I have gone back and read it a time and time again, and all of them are just amazing, including the scary apt pupil. I mean, it's a disturbing...
kind of gets into that rage territory a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
And the body is just wonderful. So, anything you want to share on that, Lou, and your comments on it?
Well, it's interesting that, as you mentioned, 3 out of the 4 novellas here have been turned into movies. The only one that hasn't been turned into a movie is The Breathing Method, and there's been several attempts to get that one made, but to me, it doesn't really lend itself to. It's more like a Twilight Zone episode than a standalone movie. So I don't really know if we'll ever see it as a movie. The book is called Different Seasons, and each story represents a different time period of the year. Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption represents hope, or spring, because hope springs eternal. Apt Pupil is the summer of corruption, because a boy finds out that his a neighbor is a former Nazi war criminal. Yeah. And of course, he falls into that trap. The Body, which is the fall from innocence, became the basis for the one of Rob Reiner's excellent Stephen King adaptations, Stand by Me. And the Breathing Method, which is a dark tale, is A Winter's Tale, and that's the closing story. So, 4 strong stories. 2 great movies, 1 half decent movie, mostly based on because of Ian McKellen's wonderful performance as the Nazi war criminal. What can you say? I mean, I love Rita. I love the Shawshank Redemption movie, and I think it's one of the few instances where the adaptation is better than the source material. And this is just a wonderful collection.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is one that I missed back then, and I didn't even really put it together until the movies came out with Stand by Me and Shawshank, and it's really hard to go back and read a book once you've seen the movie because you already have images in your head, and it goes both ways, I guess, too. It's hard to sometimes see a movie if you've read the book because you have images in your head that you created yourself. But so I did not read this one at all, and I even tried. I had it, and I started reading The Body a couple of times, and I was just never able to get past already experiencing it through the movies. So
I would check it out. If nothing else, it is amazing how close Shawshank does. I mean, and I agree with you. I think it elevates the story, but it's good. And if nothing else, the final story is just amazing. So
I'm reading. I was just reading as you guys were talking. I'm kind of checking out a couple of the the little synopsis or the little plot summaries real quick, and it actually that one does seem pretty kind of interesting. That the breathing method. It seems like could be something I would be interested in checking out.
Yeah, I think so, because that hasn't been a movie. Yeah, very, very, and maybe 2 of the 4 kind of end in a happy, a fairly happy way.
Yeah,
So,
even though reality is kind of impinged upon Stand By Me, because we all know what happened to River Phoenix later on.
Yes.
So that moment when he disappears from the frame, that always kind of creeps me out. And the other thing with the body is it's pretty autobiographical for Stephen King, because that's search for that body is something that they actually did. And the other thing I love about that story is it highlights one thing we haven't mentioned so far is King is pretty funny. Like even in the darkest books, there's always a good chuckle or two. And of course, the body really showcases this with the whole lard-ass Hogan story about the pie eating contest.
Oh, that was the best.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, now I'm remembering reading that actually.
Yeah.
I remember now that I may have read that one.
Yeah.
Because I remember picturing it differently than the movie. Yeah. No, that's good stuff.
So we moved to 1983. Christine, this was a scary book to me, and it was. I guess at times, we all feel like we're an outsider, and and this whole love of a car and feeling part of something, and I'm a romantic, so I always want the couple to get together, and there's just this things going on there. Is a fascinating novel.
Yeah, I loved it. I remember being enthralled with it. It probably took me, I don't know, probably a month to read, 4 weeks to read. Again, this was back when I was in high school, so I was doing a lot of things. I wasn't just wrapped up in a book. No, I was playing video games probably.
Sure.
Or driving your own car.
Exactly.
Let's see. No, not until 84.
Okay.
Oh well. But anyway, awesome. Supernatural. Well, relatable characters with it, especially with him being bullied in school and then finding a way to deal with it through his car. It's a great story. He's telling another good story with a little twist. It's beautiful.
It's he's picking up on the the whole teenage outsider thing, plus the the American love affair with cars, or North American love affair with cars. I got to say for myself, while I enjoyed it, it's not one that has stuck with me over time. Maybe I've just grown up because it's focused on a very specific time period in your life, whereas the other ones I think are generally tend to be a broader range or more adult concerns. So this one has a very narrow focus for me, and that's why it hasn't stuck with me as much as the other ones.
So then we moved to Cycle of the Werewolf. I remember this is a very short story, right?
Yep.
And I remember liking it a lot. I don't remember much else about it, except his kind of version of telling a werewolf story.
Yeah, that's pretty well it. It's a slight book. I actually remember the movie a bit more, Silver Bullet, than I do the book at this stage. I've only read it maybe once. It's because it is a slight book. I almost have a feeling like it's something he told his kids at night as a story, and then he decided to document it and just make a book out of it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I whipped through that one pretty quick. It was a classic. It was kind of a classic story retold.
Yeah.
I mean, the werewolf story's been around forever. It's just the way the way he's able to spin it and just put it into his words.
Yeah.
Makes it made it his own, and it was a fun little book. It was not good descriptive stuff, but not real extremely heavy to read.
It's more of it's almost like a YA book, what you would term a YA book nowadays.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So that's well said. So then we get to the book that I just detested. I just hated this Pet Cemetery.
I love this one.
It was so depressing, and I just remember reading this and saying, I will never want to read this book again.
And have you?
No, I have never have. And so maybe if I went back, but just the idea was it's just such a sad story. And,
it's truly demented. This one's really demented. Yeah.
And, we, Lou and I, in our part-time podcasting, do a Game of Thrones podcast, and we talked about The Monkey's Paw in a recent episode, and we did not mention this book, but it is definitely a retelling of that tale. And I think King has said that, right?
I totally did. You just totally grabbed my attention on it. I did not realize that. Yeah. I never put it together. I
think he said that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's referenced The Monkey's Paw. I mean, and then again, King shows his ability to pull out those things that scare us the most. And what parent is not scared about their kid being killed in an accident or something?
Right. And his description of that whole scene was just unbelievable.
Because it's based on something that happened in real life. One of his sons almost got run over by a truck like that.
Wow!
Oh, really?
Yeah. And you just can't read fast enough.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't read fast enough, and my heart was pounding, and you're just like, oh my, how is this happening? I mean, it was just so radical, and you don't want to imagine a child, a toddler like that. And my wife and I don't have any kids, but we had a foster child that was 2, and I cannot put myself in that mindset of ever having to deal with that situation. And I think that's what makes that scene so scary. It is. That is
deepest fears.
Primal. It is primal,
it is.
Man.
Exactly.
Oh, I think some of his most descriptive work was, in my opinion, I think some of his best descriptions were in Pet Sematary. I was so wrapped up in his little universe of that book. Seriously, that was Pascal, and how he described this ghost of this kid. Just every little thing. It was you just on the edge of your seat the whole time. At least I was. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Some people may disagree, but that was the way I saw that one.
Yeah, to me, this is King's darkest book that he's ever written. King said himself when he finished writing it, he put it in the drawer for a couple of months. He didn't even know if he wanted to publish it because it was just so dark. But
he scared himself.
He scared himself with this one. I mean, it is like if the listeners are out there, if you're, depending on your age, if you don't have kids yet and you're still single, you might read this and think, oh, this is kind of a cool twist in the monkey's tail. But I think once you're married and you have kids, one of the biggest fears you have is one of your kids dying, and the way that it happens in this book, and like Jesse, you said you remember that thing about the garbage disposal scene and Firestarter. From this book, I always remember the moment, and it's such a little thing, is when the father breaks into the son's grave and opens the coffin to take the body out. And the body has a little piece of cotton batting in the mouth, and he pulls it out, and the lips and he says, and the lips made that little blip sound.
Ah.
That just creeps me out every time I read that scene. It just creeps me right out. and it's not really a gross scene, but it's just
it's it's a sound that you can totally picture exactly what he's talking about. It was good.
Unbelievable story.
I know you are a dad, so were you able to distance yourself a little bit from it? Because I did not have a child when I read it, but it still was just so depressing to me that I've never wanted to reread it.
Well, because I like horror, I did go back to it and read it after I had a son, but I think I actually appreciated it more because of that, because I could really relate to what the character was going through,
right?
Or the family was going through, right? Whereas before it was kind of like, oh, that's kind of it was more of an intellectual exercise. But this one, the second time I read it, this was like a real gut puncher.
I mean, it makes you actually consider, would I really do that? Would I go and take my child up to that sacred ground and actually try it? Mm-hmm. You start questioning yourself on that, I can imagine.
Absolutely. And even the title of the book, the misspelling, like a child's spelling of cemetery. It creeps you out right from the beginning.
I was just looking at that. I was trying to figure out like why he spun it in that direction. I don't know why he spelled it.
Because that's the way a kid spells it.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. I never knew the connection. I thought maybe it was some old English thing or something.
Oh, it might be, but I think it's just meant to be the way a kid would spell cemetery.
Yeah.
Spelling it, right?
Right. That's how I would spell it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the ending is so scary, right? And just talk about a Twilight Zone open ending, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I could be that brave to go back to the well again. So I am tempted after talking about these to see if it's a different. I remember reading The Talisman, but I don't remember much about it.
Oh my God, I love this one. I loved it. I thought him working with Peter Straub. Now, I never read any other Peter Straub stuff, but I thought they did a great job. Whatever they did together, collaboration wise, I love the fantasy of this movie. I mean, of this show, of this book. I love the fantasy side of it. It was just the flipping back and forth between the two realities is really, really cool to me. That was, and Wolf's character, is that what he called him? Wolf?
Yep, Wolf.
Yeah, okay. Wolf, his reaction to this world was, it was funny. I mean, it was entertaining to see him learning about this, and how he didn't like the smell of it, and it smelled just terrible with the
gasoline.
With the fresh, the gas and the fresh road work or the fresh asphalt or something. I think.
Yeah.
But I love this book so much that I listened to it a second time when the Black House came out. Because I knew it was a follow up to the Talisman, and so I wanted to refresh myself with that. So I went back and listened to it, and was still completely enthralled and completely wrapped up in that universe that he creates.
Yeah.
So absolutely loved it.
Yeah. So this is a very cool kind of Phrygian style of story with two realities. Mm-hmm. One world is much more the science world, and the other one's much more about magic. And as you said, Wolf is just a great character. So Jack Sawyer. I mean, this is Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain meets the werewolf kind of story. So it's a road story. Yeah, it's just a lot of fun.
I think I like the span of it too. I think the largeness, like I was saying before, that Cujo was such a small environment. This is such a huge universe of experience, and that's what I liked about this one also. The size of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to spend a fortune and and just because
and a lot of time.
Yes, exactly. And they I just see they did a sequel, and I know I've never read the sequel, So
Yeah.
Black House.
yeah, I'm gonna have.
And we're
Yeah.
still waiting for the concluding book on that one too.
Oh,
So
nice.
Oh, they didn't.
There's-
So they're still doing another one.
they still have one more to do.
Oh, right. You know what? I
Hopefully,
remember you were-
hopefully in the
you
next
said
year
you're-
or two.
Yeah, I think it was Lilia. Well, I'm sorry. How do you say it?
Lilia's Library. Yep.
Right. He was on one of your podcasts. You guys were saying that Peter Straub is not quite ready to wrap it up yet, or something.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's one more book, one more story to tell. So hopefully they'll get to it.
Now, I do remember Thinner.
Yeah.
I am a man of size. I have been fighting my weight as long as I can remember. And this is one that the idea of just magically losing weight really does sound like, be careful what you wish for. Because the idea of magically losing weight and becoming thinner, quote unquote, is fascinating. And I remember what they were doing when they had the hit and run accident, and how they turned on each other, and then the ending is just so dark where he's sits down to eat the strawberry pie, or a great novel, and scary as heck, but I was caught up into it, and this was one that and I think this is the one that people now knew, right, that Richard Bachman had done it, that it was King, and it sold a lot more copies, if I remember correctly.
No, I don't think he was outed yet.
Okay.
When this came out.
Okay,
so.
I may have been misremembering.
Huh.
So, what's y'all's thoughts on this tragic and horrible Weight Watchers plan?
I love the ending. I loved it. I'm a little on. It's analyzing how I see a lot of these books now. Looking back, I'm like, I really like the dark endings. I don't know why. It's really It's I'm finding out a little bit about myself I didn't realize. I like that dark ending, or even, and the way he describes his the main character's feelings when he realizes that the pie has been eaten by. We're not worried about spoilers, right?
Oh yeah, I guess we should have.
No, we're not.
No, we're not. Yeah, I will ask Dave to put that at the very beginning of this, that we will be spoiling. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the ends of a lot of movies.
Yeah, and a lot of books. Yes.
Yeah, they taste just like ladyfingers. They taste just like ladyfingers. Probably one of my favorite endings to all books, and that's a different book, I know, but it's just I'll never forget the end of that little story. Which we haven't gotten to that book yet, have we? No. That's,
yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Oh no, I was just saying, I just love that the way he wrapped it up. It was good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I like this one. Again, this one plays, to me, it really feels like a Twilight Zone kind of episode story again. And, I can hear what Scott's saying about the dark ending for this one, but I can never really warm up to this one as much because I just didn't find any of the characters very sympathetic in this book. They were all very selfish. And while I do like the ending, and I do think they got what they deserved, these are not characters that I want to spend time with.
And they are unlikable. I remember that a lot.
For a King book. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he's very unlikable. The next is The Eyes of the Dragon, which is a young adult novel. I remember loving this adventure. It was just a lot of fun. And it really felt like a Stephen King telling a fairy tale,
And the flag of this book is the same flag as in The Dark Tower.
Oh,
Yeah, I honestly I never read this one, so I don't have a lot of input on this. It didn't. It just never grabbed my attention as far as the topic at the time.
Okay.
It's a good fairy tale novel, and it has ties to the Dark Tower, so
Interesting.
it's a nice quick read.
Yes, I do remember that too. And another quick story is I was working at a company in I guess 88, 87, 88, and my boss's son was in high school, and she said, "Hey, is there anything wrong with this book for him to read?" And I remember, no, I think it's perfectly fine. And I guess there's a little bit of raunchiness in part of it because she later, brought that up to me. But, all I remembered is it was just, I remember it being a great book and was, yeah, he should read this. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I did not read The Skeleton Crew. I think my perception is that his short stories tend to be a little darker and a little more macabre. So
yes, that would be a good call.
So I stayed away from it.
Uh-huh.
So you guys will have to talk about this one for me.
Okay. Scott?
Well, guess what? I love a lot of the stories in this book.
Yep.
Because of the darker side of it.
Yep.
Like what was the name of that? Was it Beach World?
Yeah.
The doctor stranded on the island.
Yeah.
That was so intriguing to me. Like really, and that finishing line, "Ladyfingers, they taste just like ladyfingers." It's just it sticks with me. I haven't read this in years. I haven't read this in decades, but I will never forget that little bit of that story. And I like these short stories. I think I enjoy a little bit more, maybe because I probably suffer a little bit from ADD,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't hold the attention of some of the longer books, even though The Stand was completely intriguing at 1,000 pages or whatever it was. Yeah. But like another one of my favorites in this, and was put into a movie, was The Raft. His description of some of the things that happened on that raft were just haunting. It just, you can't, when the girl is being eaten from underneath with the, like pulling her through, or was it a guy? It might have been a guy.
It was a girl.
Oh yeah. Being sucked through the slats between the wood. Yeah. And the crunch, the description of the crunching of the bones and the explosion of blood that was everywhere. I'm like, oh my gosh. Wow.
Jesse's just sitting there and I'm sure glad I didn't read this one.
Yeah. The Raft. Of course, The Mist is part of this. And that was.
Yeah, I love that story.
That was pretty phenomenal. I remember reading, when I read this collection, a friend that I was in high school with, he was really into film. Mm-hmm. And his goal, like his dream in life, was to make the movie The Mist. Unfortunately, somebody else was able to do that, and I don't even know if he ever got into film or not. The Mist, it was really, I liked it too, and I think you guys mentioned it on the Stephen King podcast, where he likes to create situations where people are kind of cut off from the outside world.
Yep. And
this is one of those situations, and he just did it so well. Mm-hmm. It was really neat. A few of the other ones, the monkey, the toy monkey it's definitely a good one because and that story's been told several times over the years. Like the Twilight Zone, you got Talking Tina. Yeah. The doll that can't be killed, and this monkey brings evil no matter what you try to do to get rid of it, and it was haunted the family, the father of the kids that find it, and I just remember a lot of these stories, the shorter stories. I just loved them. I like a lot of his shorter stuff.
Yeah, these are like short jabs kind of stories, except for The Mist is a novella length story.
Yeah.
I love that story. I think Darabont did overall a really good job with it, especially with the budget that he had. The Raft is a great story. I think it was in Creepshow 2. So if you've seen that movie, then you've seen the story. But it's basically about a group of teenagers that go out swimming on a raft, and this oil slick follows them out, and it basically it devours the teenagers like
so one by one, slowly.
That's just a fantastic story.
And it's not very long either. I don't think it was more than 30, 40 pages, but man,
there's some great stories in here. And the Jaunt is one about a kind of like a transporter trip that turns out badly, which is kind of cool. Transported by the Star Trek transporter.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of idea. Beach World is interesting. You mentioned Survivor Type. That's a pretty dark story.
Oh wait, which one was Survivor Type? Was that
the one where
doctor?
Where he starts eating himself to survive.
Yes, that's radical. That's Survivor Type. Sorry. Yeah, that was good stuff. And then one of the other ones that I forgot about until I was kind of perusing the titles was Cain Rose Up. Mm-hmm. And thinking about what happened with Rage, I'm kind of surprised that he didn't do something with that one too.
Yeah,
because that one's pretty hardcore.
Yeah. So this is King when he had a much more of an edge. I think he's softened, especially in this last decade. But 22 stories in this collection, and they're all pretty great, and quite a few of them have been adapted for either TV series or movies.
All right, then. I feel like I'm good that I missed it.
Yeah, if you don't like that the hardcore horror, really very descriptive stuff, some of these stories are pretty radical.
And just a little context here. This is when King was getting, he was like the darling of the media. This is the year that he actually did a American Express card commercial.
Right.
Really?
I don't know if you've never seen it. Look it up. It's hilarious.
Yes.
So King was really rocking it. And then, of course, his next book came out, which to many people is their favorite book.
Yeah. I remember, and we're talking about It. It's the only book that he released in '86. It
was big.
It is big. Couple stories from It. I remember reading it and getting to the point where I was close enough to the ending that I didn't want to put it down.
Right.
So I read, and for those of you, hopefully most of you have read it, but if not, the ending in the book, the book goes back and forth in time periods. And it's parallel storytelling, and so the climax is having these characters fight, and you're getting two battles at the same time, back and forth. And I remember being like at 1 a.m, eyes wide open, just I couldn't go to sleep. I mean, I'd finished the book, and it was like so full of adrenaline and excitement, and then later, my lovely bride would every once in a while go, "Kiss me, fat boy."
Oh my god!
and I hated her just a little bit.
Oh my god!
And also, at the complex we lived in at the time had a huge drainage.
Nice.
Where how when that's the length of for at a complex, industrial, and this huge drainage thing that I had to walk by to go to my apartment, and I always just walked a little quicker
and a little further out, right?
Yes, exactly. So, a wonderful story, certainly consequences, but once again, I feel like there is a quasi-happy ending. Mm-hmm. There is a consequences, and I'm okay with that. This is once again one of my favorites.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I had a problem with this one.
Oh, interesting.
Like not it just never grabbed my full attention. I don't know why. It might have been that's summer after I graduated high school is what it says the release date was. So, I think I was just probably preoccupied with some other things. So I don't recall a lot of this. I do remember there's a lot of characters in it. He had to build a lot of characters. That's about the only thing I do remember from it at this point. And that clowns are creepy.
Yeah,
but we've known that for years. So
yeah, and I wonder where that started from, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So a lot of characters because he's doing adult and children version of the same characters.
Yeah.
It is kind of 1-2 for a lot of people. They usually say The Stand or It is their favorite book. I like it a lot, but I just fundamentally have problems with stories where the characters can't remember what they did. So I don't like the fact that and I understand structurally why he does it in this story, but I don't like the fact that the adults don't remember what they did as children to defeat the creature the first time. So I would rather that they did remember. I understand why they don't, but aside from that, and maybe Scott, that's why you have trouble with the story. I don't know. Just throwing that out there, but the imagery of the clown, that's the poor younger brother with the sewer and the newspaper boat going down into the drain, like that stuff is it's like the stuff of nightmares, and it's just an amazing display of King's writing power to handle two versions of characters at different time periods and make each set distinctive, and yet you could see the commonalities between both of them. So it's just a powerful showcase for his writing.
If it wasn't 1,100 pages, I might pick it up again, but I highly doubt it. That's a big undertaking.
Yeah, well, just wait, hopefully, for the new movie version that they keep talking about.
This is one that I own in hardback, and I am tempted to go back and visit again. Next up, we have the second Dark Tower. We've already talked a little bit about it. Anything else? And Lou, you say this is where he catches kind of the wind.
Yeah, this is the one that catches fire. The first book is it's kind of like the prologue. This is the one which sort of grounds it in a more relatable settings that for a lot of people they will really like. But I just love the drawing of the three refers to Roland and his posse, basically putting his posse together, which in the books they're called the Ka-tet. Ka is a wheel, and the wheel turns slowly and it comes back, and it has that kind of victory but with a price kind of thing to it as well. It's an uncaring wheel, but it will, what goes around comes around. And just the whole concept of the story of introducing the alternate realities, some time travel aspects, and the starting of a wonderful love story relationship between two very unlikely characters, and another kind of love story between Roland and a young boy called Jake, who Roland becomes the father figure for over the course of the series. And what a heartbreaking relationship they have. My, oh my. But just a fantastic high adventure, high octane, just escaping danger by the skin of your teeth book. Just fantastic stuff.
I remember this one being a little bit more a little bit more exciting to read than the Gunslinger. The Gunslinger was definitely a setup for what was coming, and so I do remember this one being a lot faster pace. Mm-hmm. All right, Cujo. What's going on with Cujo back there?
But for most people, it's actually the Wastelands. I think is or Wizard and Glass is their favorite book, which are book 3 and 4. But I like this one quite a bit because this is the one that sets up the whole series really, and puts a lot of the pieces in place that when you get to the book 7, that emotional investment you have really gets paid off or tweaked or crushed or hurt. Or whatever. This is the one where all the heartstrings are tugged from.
Then we move on to Misery, I think a great book because it is very little, nothing supernatural about it at all, I guess. And just, I enjoyed the book before the movie, then liked the movie, but I just, you always suspect that there is a dark side to fandom. And this...
I'm your number one fan.
Yes.
I'm your number one fan. Yeah, you don't want a number one fan, really. I don't think so.
And it just is so well done. It's a quick read. Especially after it, it's kind of nice that it's a short novel, right?
Yeah.
This one, I remember just going through this quickly.
Yeah, I think I whipped through this one pretty quick too. Again, I like the realism of no supernatural. That's kind of cool. I mean, I love the supernatural side of some of the stuff that he writes, but I also do like some of the stuff that's real. And this could definitely be something that happens. I mean, there's a lot of psychotic people out there that are huge fans. I mean, one example is like, Tom Petty is a awesome artist, and we loved to listen to him. But he had a fan that actually ended up burning down his house. I mean, it's so close to reality, but just the way he's able to put it into just to these a handful of people and create this little world of how twisted somebody really can get because they're so infatuated with the other person
and not liking the creative direction you went.
Right.
And I also remember really that when the writer, the main character, does a cheat to get, and she calls him on it. And,
cock-a-doodie.
Yeah, and he, all of his, they're being crazy. I remember him, going, "She's right. I did do this," and once again, it is one of those things where be careful what you wish for, because he brings this book and it's a lot darker book, and she talks about how
it's
this
beneath him.
Yeah, and this is not what you want, and Peter David talks a lot about that. Fans are never sure what they really want, and they just keep, if you try to do something different, they may, they want what they want, and you get blamed if you're telling the same story over and over again. But if you try to change the story, then other fans are mad because they do want the same thing over and over again. So a scary book, a suspenseful book, but I also thinks a lot about fame, and without being this, it's so horrible to be burdened, with this. Doesn't talk that way, but it does talk about, what it can cost you from fandom and the dark side of it. And it's like a well done sports car, right? It just goes.
Yeah, it was exciting going. That was a good read. On the edge of your seat again. Always hoping you're rooting for him to get away. You're rooting for him to be able to escape this crazy person. But yeah,
Annie.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you said a lot of great things there, Jesse, and this is a quick read because it's only like 300 pages. It's probably one of the last short books. Well, no, the dark half is short too, but and like you said, it does touch on the relationship of a writer with his fandom, and the whole the pressure on writers to keep creating material that the fans want, and it usually has to do with series, which King, for the most part, has avoided. Though if you look at his work as a whole, since it's all related, it's kind of like one big long series. But and the other point that you mentioned about when Annie got upset at that Paul wrote like a cheat start to the book because his explanation about how he brought misery back to life was not fair, and then she made that allusion to a movie serial that she saw in the theater as a kid, where they showed the car go over the cliff and the hero was still in the car, and then next week they showed him jumping out of the car just before it went over the cliff, and they said that was a cheat.
Yeah.
And I think that is the power of King's work. He said it himself. Fiction is the truth wrapped in lies. So you can make up any kind of story, but once you establish who the characters are, you have to follow through with the story based on how those characters would behave. And that's the truth along, with the themes of universal fears and, desires and love and wants and whatnot. But once you establish the characters in that, you can't all of a sudden make them do something that hasn't been previously set up in the book. So, because when it happens, you know it in your gut, and it usually takes you out of the story, and you'll say, "Oh, they would never do that," or "I don't believe that." But once you set up the story, King follows through to it, even if it's not an ending that you wanted. But you can say to yourself, "That wasn't the ending I wanted," but within the story, that ending does make sense, and it does feel right and honest.
Now, this is an interesting one for sure. Now, do you think that maybe this is based on one of his deepest fears?
Oh yes, he's had this incident where somebody's come into his house.
Was it before or after this was?
I'm not sure the timeline, but he's always been very savvy about his relationship with his fandom. I mean, he was one of the first writers before the internet who tried to reach out to the writers in his intros, because he would say to the writers, "This is what I've been doing between books, and I want to thank you all that I'm able to do it." And then that's where the term "constant readers" came from. So I think King is very savvy about this kind of stuff, and his work backs it up.
Yeah, well, I mean, not only the psychotic side of things that she brings, or that character brings in, but what about the like people approving of what he's writing?
Oh, well, in this decade, King was very much looked down upon, and we'd have to go into like almost 2 decades from now before I think King before people, even literary, sources started to appreciate him for being a true writing talent and not just a hack writing thrillers.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also, I've read that, this a lot doing with his drug addiction, and, the things going with that. And so there's just something beautiful about a concise, story. There's not a lot of characters. It just flows. Which brings us to the next book, The Tommyknockers. I remember reading it, and I remember being unsatisfied. Like going, I don't understand what's happening on this book. And so I've never reread it. I don't have a lot of memories of it, except just being kind of confused.
I remember thinking, wow, this has a lot of potential. It didn't seem. I agree with you that you felt unsatisfied. I liked the concept. I liked how he started it, but it just didn't seem to. It didn't grab me the way a lot of his other stuff does.
Yeah, it's way too long for the conceit.
I think it would be a better short story.
Yeah,
it could be told a better way.
Yeah, and I think this is where one of the few times where King's excesses showed up in the quality of his work, because I don't think that this is one of his better books, and it's usually near the bottom of the pile when people vote for their favorite King books.
Yeah.
So that was quick and short. And I know nothing about Nightmares in the Sky. In fact, I went, what is this? Once again, Lou, being awesome, did the homework for us. He sent us a text like, oh yeah, here's the books that were published in the 80s. So can you tell me a little bit about this?
Yeah, I'm intrigued too. I have no idea what this is.
Yeah, this is more of a coffee table concept book. It's not a straight novel. It's basically a photographer's taken a picture of gargoyles from around the world, and King would write short little vignettes about each one of the pictures. So it's a very short 128-page book. It's not a true novel in that sense, but it is kind of cool. I mean, it's amazing what King can come up for with these things. But this is not a true novel, and it's not something that probably a lot of people have seen or read.
Oh, okay.
I gotta tell you, as a photographer, I love the photographer's name. F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
that is classic.
Absolutely.
I'm looking that up. Is that really his name, or is that just a...
I don't know.
Yeah, F. Scott Fitzgerald.
F. Scott Fitzgerald.
And he's got quite a few books.
Yeah.
Adrianac Style, Lodges, Dead Kennedys, Escapees, San Francisco Punk Photo Documentary, Orvis Guide to Great Sporting Lodges, Pillars of the Almighty. So he seems to be interested in buildings and lodges and things of that nature. So
he had a pretty good decade. A lot of different, a lot of output, a lot of different kind. I guess different seasons would be number one for me on release of the 80s, followed by...
You got one more book.
Oh, we do? Okay.
Yes. 1989, The Dark Half.
I missed that. Okay, thank you.
And you said that was a follow-up to which book?
That's more of a Stephen King putting a closing on the Richard Bachman saga.
Okay.
Because by this point, after Thinner came out, the whole Richard Bachman pseudonym was discovered. So King even had like a fake burial for Richard Bachman. You can look that up if you want.
Wow, really?
And this story touches on that, and it's an interesting story about a split personality or two different characters, depending on how you look at the story. And it's about a writer whose career is being torpedoed by this person who thinks that he's stolen his life. So it's a dark book. Again, it suffers a little from lack of focus, I think. But I actually enjoy the movie version with Timothy Hutton. I thought he did a fairly good job with it.
I remember reading this and liking it because it was a change of pace, and it was after Misery, after the Tommyknockers, everything. This was just a pure supernatural thriller, right? That I remember the whole the child thing, in the head and stuff, which I remember just being very, very creeped out by.
The teeth.
Yes.
The teeth.
And so, I thought it is really, really, I thought it was, it certainly isn't one of my favorite, but it was one I enjoyed. And I thought it was a nice kind of, in a way, going back to, pure horror. Yeah.
I wish I was able to throw anything in on this one, but I this was a month after I picked up everything that I owned.
Yeah.
Put it in the back of my pickup truck and drove from California to Chicago to move. And so it was released about a month afterwards, but that first couple of years that I lived in Chicago, I really didn't read anything.
Yeah.
so I kind of lost touch with that kind of thing. In fact, I took a long break from Stephen King after that. Just because life starts to happen, and you run out of time, or at least you allow time to get away from you.
No, I totally agree with that.
No.
And understand. Now, is there another one that I forgot?
No, that's it.
Okay, good.
Sorry, I didn't.
No. I'm glad you did. I appreciate it. A great decade. Like I said, I would pick different seasons as my favorite, followed by It. How about you? If you had to pick one, Lou, what would you pick for the decade?
I mean, every time people ask about picking their favorite Stephen King stories, it's because he's written so many of them. It's like choosing your favorite child. It rotates from time to time, but I really do like The Dark Tower too. I think the drawing of 3 is just fantastic. like you, different seasons because it contains the Shawshank Redemption. I love that story.
Yeah.
To me, that is and especially the movie, that's soul food for non-religious people, and even for religious people, I think.
Absolutely.
If you're ever feeling down in the blues, I don't think you can find a better story about hope. And that's the old, you got to go through hell to get to heaven kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So I just love that. So I would put those two up there quite a bit. And Pet Sematary will always hold a special place in my heart because that's dark stuff, man.
All right, very nice. Scott, how about you? This is not on the agenda, but I thought I'd throw a curve. And it's okay if you don't have one.
No, I do have one.
Okay.
And I'm going to have to go with the Talisman. And
cool.
Like I said before, I love the fantasy of it. I wanted to be Jack. I wanted to be able to jump back and forth between realities. And I think that's telling of my experience in high school even. There was times when I didn't want to be in part of this world. I wanted to be somewhere else in a different world, and I think this was a good escape for that. And it was just a really fun book, even though it was left open ended, but it was just a lot of fun. Like I said, I wanted to be Jack. Okay. I wanted to be a character in that book, which is really not normal for me. I usually don't feel that way about it. So that would be it. And then I'm with Lou on this one. Pet Sematary is always going to be something
nice,
something really, really that I'll never forget. I mean, it's definitely one that I always think back on. There's a lot.
And I will tell you, as I go, we're going to hang up in a minute. I'm going to go clean the kitchen, and I'm going to see the garbage disposal, and I'm going to think of Firestarter. So, Lou,
red rum.
Yes, Lou. If people have been intrigued by your discussion of Stephen King, how can they find more from you?
You can go to the Lilia's library site and look for us there. Lilia runs a lot of stuff. The podcast is actually just one of the things that he does. It's just a side thing, but you can also find our podcasts there, and or the Stephen King podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at Lou W. Sytsma, Sytsma. And if you go through Twitter, that'll be the easiest way to hook up, and hopefully you'll be interested enough to listen to a couple more podcasts about Stephen King over there. And I hope we haven't gone too long here, guys.
We are hitting almost 2 hours.
But I hope everybody
great.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, I now want to go back and do a 70s and the 90s and the aughts. This was so much fun.
Yeah.
And so, Scott, how about yourself? Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Scott's Eye.
Okay.
And occasionally on the 80s Reboot.
Absolutely. I am at Jesse Jackson, DFW. I do a Doctor Who podcast, and we still need to get Lou on there to tell us why he doesn't like the Doctor. And I think he has good reasons. I was really impressed by that. Lou and I spent a long weekend together last year at DragonCon. But what happens at DragonCon stays at DragonCon.
Oh my gosh.
We shared a room.
Yes, we did. And more than that.
No, wait. Whoa. Is this Planes, Trains, and Automobiles story?
We did
pretty
make that
close.
many times. Yes, we did.
Those aren't pillows.
Yes, and I will tell you really quickly, one of the best lines I've ever heard is Monday night after we had been there all weekend for DragonCon. We both were flying home on Tuesday, and we're exhausted. If you've ever been to DragonCon, it is a huge convention. There is tons of walking. There is so much to see. And Lou and I got an early dinner, and we went back to the hotel room, and Star Trek 4, where they're
Voyage
back.
Home.
Yeah, Voyage Home is on.
Mm-hmm.
And we're watching that, and I go, God, they look so young. And Lou says, just think, when you watched it originally, you thought they all looked so old.
Oh my gosh.
And it was true.
Yes.
Oh no.
True, yes. So,
reality check.
Absolutely.
Time is relative.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So thank you for listening, and look for the feed. We're going to talk movies next, and I think Dave is going to join us. So for now, I'm just going to say, in real life, endings aren't always neat, whether they're happy endings or whether they're sad endings. Thank you, guys, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80's Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80's Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr at 80's Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.